and Jack each have yours. And then all these lovely people have, or some anyway, do. So a toast to Mark on publication day for the Gray Man book. There you are.
Congratulations.
And Jack? Here we go, dear. Right. So I'm delighted to say not only is Mark here, which is, a good thing, but in the wonderful jacket over there, I didn't really appreciate.
You should
I need
talk in the
this.
other one.
Didn't really appreciate. And I haven't even drunk anything yet. That's terrible. Anyway, right. So this is Jack Stewart, who is a wonderful author, former. Well, you tell him who you are because you have an impressive career.
I'm nobody. You guys came from Mark anyway. I mean, let's be honest.
I came to see Jack.
Okay, well, I'll tell Mark then. Yeah, I flew F-18s in the Navy for 23 years. Now I'm an airline pilot, and in my spare time, I write thrillers.
Lots of thrillers.
Lots of thrillers.
But the good news is, because he flies for Southwest, he's almost like here on demand. And I thought it would be more fun for Mark as somebody who actually knew something about weaponry were here, not just me. So I can talk about, being in Romania and going to the Black Sea and all that stuff, but I absolutely cannot talk about.
We can teach you about weaponry. I think that'd be fun.
Listen,
That sounds fun. We should do that.
When I went to visit CJ, who will be here next Monday on his ranch, he had a shooting range out at the back of the ranch, and he handed me a 45 and said, "Try your luck." It was so pitiful. It's just about knocked me down. I completely missed the target. I decided that weaponry is really not for me. So there we are. Anyway, Jack has some books up front, and if you haven't read him, I highly recommend them. He's got a Top Gun guy who is terrific, and Jack is going to be writing the W.E. Griffin series, which this is all Legacy Publishing is something. Well, if you know, Mark wrote the Tom Clancy books for a little while. I haven't even drunk anything. And
it's
so
Tuesday.
it's a really good way for authors to kind of, I don't know get started on their craft or something, writing in somebody else's universe. But my experience is that most of the time after a while they want to write in their own universe, which is why we got the Gray Man. Right. So, Jack.
That was a great segue. I was going to talk about Clancy right from the start, but Mark's in luck because they don't have my favorite Clancy book of all time, Flashpoint. Have anybody read Flashpoint by Don Bentley? Okay. So I have a little bit of a bone to pick. First of all, I like Don. He's a great guy, good author. He names his characters really well. If you remember, there was a P-8 pilot by the name of Jack Stewart. The problem is I only let Don sit in the cockpit of an F-18, but Mark I took flying in an F-18, and I was looking at the list of characters in this book, and I didn't see a Jack Stewart. So tell me about how you choose character names, Mark.
I wait until I really get browbeat on video in front of a lot of people.
Gray Man 15, I'm ready.
Sometimes I name books. I name characters in books after people I know, and I shall, for sure. I had a friend or a guy who was a bookseller once. He's like, "Got to put me in a book. You got to put me in a book." And I was like, "What do you want to do?" And he's like, "I don't care." And I was like, "What if you die?" And he's like, "I don't care. Kill me off in a book." I was like, I said, "How do you want to die?" And he's like, "I don't care. Any way you choose." And I go, autoerotic asphyxiation? And he didn't know what that was, but everybody else at the table did, and they had a good laugh. And
So
I
you're
never
saying
did that.
I can't die like that in your book? Okay.
So I'm saying you got a shot.
Okay. All right. Good.
Let me just interrupt and say I've now found a new potential role. Mark was kind enough to put me in the acknowledgments for Midnight Black, but now I want a part. I want an actual character part.
I don't really know how to take that.
I think you should name a character for me, and you can decide what horrible thing will happen to me.
Okay. All right.
I'll be the
love
pilot.
this.
You can just
Yeah.
I didn't realize, people pay to do that at charity auctions and so forth. I'm gonna take advantage of our many years of acquaintance and try to get in there for free.
If only we could just crowdsource a plot right now. I could write the book.
Okay.
Have we got the character names?
Act 1. Who wants to go? Pick somebody. So okay, well, let's talk about plot. Tell me. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's read the Gray Man series. So going up to Midnight Black, there's not a lot of mystery on how this one starts. But how do you go from that initial idea of, okay, this is going to happen, to developing what turns out to be a phenomenal book? And by the way, if you know, it just came out today, so no one really has read it, but it's great. It's a really good book. I really enjoyed it. So how do you go about developing this?
Yeah, so for me, the first thing is every book has to stand alone, and you don't have to have read the earlier books. But if you had read the previous book, you would know that one character has been captured. And it sort of ends with this woman, Zoya Zakharova, who is Court's love interest and has been off and on for several books. She is taken, and the rumor is that she's been pulled back into Russia. She's a Russian national, used to be an operative in their SVR, which is foreign intelligence, and then they put a kill or capture and kill order out on her, and then she got snagged by the Chinese and traded to the Russians at the very, very end of the last book, which some people call a cliffhanger, but my feeling is it's not a cliffhanger because the book was actually resolved. Everything, you know, the plot of that story was resolved, and then something else happened at the very end where you go, wait, what? So yeah, everybody knows who's read that book knows that this book is going to be involved. You know, is going to involve Court, you know, trying to get her out of whatever predicament she's in. And so from there, I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I really wanted to write something about the Russian penal system, something about sort of the Russian police state and what it's become, and something about geopolitics, about Ukraine and what Russia's doing in the West as far as sabotage operations they're doing all over the West, even in the United States. And so then it just kind of expanded and expanded. And then I kept catching myself and going, all right, you don't want to write a big geopolitical novel so much as you want this to be a very intimate personal story about these few characters. So Zach and Court and Zoya and Matt. And that's what this book is about. And every time the book felt like it was going to get too big, I tried to rein it back in. And pretty soon, as I was doing my research, I just said, you know, I loved, back in the 1980s and early 90s, reading Cold War novels. I read everything by Le Carré and Frederick Forsyth and Nelson DeMille and Lynn Deaton and Gerald Seymour and all these, Ralph Peters, all these great authors. And so I loved those books. And I thought, gosh, what's happening right now inside of Russia is so similar to what was happening back then. I said, you know, maybe I'm going to write this book as an homage to these Cold War novels that I loved, you know, Soviet Union novels. So that's kind of where I took the story. And there are characters in the book who were actually resistance fighters in the 1980s inside of Russia, or insurgents. And now they're in their 70s and 80s, and they help Court along the way, and young kind of insurgents in Moscow help Court. And so I wanted to sort of take a lot of stuff that was real, but also, you know, fictionalize what's happening in the world today, and kind of make it feel like, you know, one of those old Cold War novels with a little bit of John Wick, you know, kind of thrown in there as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that it is fiction, but it's set in a world that we recognize, with the tensions between, you know, Ukraine and Russia and the geopolitics of today. But you said it in a way that does feel like it's Cold War. Okay, I give you a hard time about the pilot thing, but let's go back to me because I'm a pilot and I talk about me. But no, seriously, you do a lot of training, and you do train with you know, paramilitary, like SWAT teams and people that train in that, and I see a lot of the realism in the books and what you have the characters doing. Do you ever do training, like go fly in an F-18, and then think about what kind of book you're going to write about it, or do you just sort of take the training as it comes and then work it in when you can, when it feels organic? Because that's the way it feels in this book. It feels very organic to me.
Yes, sometimes I will go try and do some particular training or learn something specifically for the book that I'm writing or for the book that I want to write. Location research is kind of always like that. You know, I don't usually just go someplace and then 2 years later decide to write a book about it. For this book, it was a little bit different. It's you can't go into Russia right now if you're an American. They're just going to snatch you up and probably trade you for some buddy that we've snatched of theirs in the West. So you can't go into Russia, especially as an author, or not especially. I mean anybody. But I fortunately went to Russia back when you could still do that. And so I've been to Moscow and to St. Petersburg, and there's scenes in Gorky Park and on the Moscow subway that was, you know, taken out of my videos and notes from the time and just my memories of the time. I actually got followed when I was in Moscow for half a day or so, which isn't nearly as sexy as it sounds. I mean, the guy really, you know, it wasn't because I was special. It was just sort of like, I guess if I went and talked to somebody that worked for the government, they would want to know about that or something. So it was just a young guy, under 30 guy, just relatively overtly following me by himself, me and the person I was with. And we went through GUM, which used to be the big department store that's in all the spy novels, Cardinal of the Kremlin. There's a big scene that takes place in GUM. Now it is a mall right next to Red Square. And had lunch in there and went to a bunch of shops. And the guy was just sort of just standing there on the mezzanine, just kind of watching. And then did some stuff outside of Red Square. And there's that same guy again. And it's not like I was particularly astute. I wasn't like looking for a tail or anything like that. It was just a guy that you kept seeing. And I actually have a photo of him somewhere, of him walking away, because he took a picture of my then girlfriend who I was there with. And when he was walking away, I was like, I'm taking a picture of that guy, because there's no way that guy, you know, he showed up in 4 places or something like that. And that was the temper then, you know. And so I like working that in the book. But going back to your question, you know, some of the training I do is very specific. I've done books where I've needed to do some long range shooting training to write about it and make it feel a little more accurate. But then a lot of times I'll get an opportunity to you know, go shoot with somebody or go down to Staccato Ranch and shoot their new guns or whatever. That's not for a book that I'm writing, but that could all work its way into a book. I mean, everybody I meet or any situation I find myself in, you know, I try and do that. I'm going to Northern Ireland. I've never been. Have you been to Northern Ireland? You've been to Northern Ireland?
I've been everywhere.
You've
You
been
know
everywhere.
that.
That's why do you think I turned and asked? I know Southwest doesn't fly there, so I didn't ask.
Yeah, not yet.
And I don't think the U.S. Navy flew there that much.
No.
Yeah.
You'll love Northern Ireland, and you will stumble over all kinds of sets relating to Game of Thrones,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's where they, you know, where they
Yeah.
filmed it. And nobody went to Northern Ireland north of Belfast, because you go there for the Titanic. That's where they built it and all. But once Game of Thrones took in, people are swarming over Northern Ireland to see. You know, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never driven a car on the wrong side of the road, and this will be my first time.
Oh my God! If you're
So I
going to
probably
drive
won't
in
come back.
Ireland, oh, don't do that.
I have to
You
drive.
can't even get insurance.
Yeah,
it's so
I have
bad.
to drive, so yeah, it's going to happen.
Well, good luck there.
Maybe the scariest thing I've ever done.
All right. So I will say, while I can't say anything about weaponry, I am well traveled. And Mark starts off this book in Bucharest. And I have been to Bucharest and Constanza, where we actually got marooned for a day because the riverboat we were on that starts in Bucharest and went down to the Black Sea and then turned around and went to Budapest. Riverboats are not allowed into the ocean or into the Black Sea because they're not, you know, seaworthy for it. And we lost an engine, so I spent extra time in Constanza. So I was really interested that you started, you know, the book there. But in a previous trip, having gone around the Black Sea in a whole different ship, I think I told you this. Sebastopol is where the Russian Navy is kept. And it was the year that they were building out for the Olympics in, was it Georgia?
Oh, Sochi in
Yeah,
in
right.
Russia. Yeah.
Anyway, we started in Istanbul and we sailed all around that. When we got to Sebastopol, they went off to do something, and I probably told this story before, and I looked down and there was a little wooden boat by a pier. And I thought, why am I getting on a bus? When instead I could resurrect my Russian, and Rob and I could get in the little boat and go sailing around Sebastopol. So that's what we did. Everybody was really nice to us, and we sailed through the Russian Navy. I have movies of the Russian Navy from 2011. that's how, fast things
Most of that
changed.
Black Sea fleet is at the bottom of the Black Sea now.
Yeah,
So
no, I know.
you,
But I
you
mean,
got it while you could.
it's so interesting that in a very short space of time that the world would change to the point where something that seemed perfectly normal to do then would be impossible now. So I think as a thriller writer, that has to be a big challenge for you. As Jack says, you want it to be real, but if circumstances could change so that even though it sounds like you'd be okay writing the book and that people could do that, by the time the book publishes, maybe they can't.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things. I think this is my 26th published novel, and every other book, I'm always trying to figure out where the world's going to be when the book comes out, and get it as close as possible. This is the first one where I didn't really do that in some ways because I wanted to write a kind of a more hopeful story than I thought the world would be, and events have borne that out. I wanted the West, in my book, the West is a little more ready to go toe-to-toe with Russia. The Russian insurgency, or the kind of anti-Kremlin people in Russia, are a lot more organized and more robust and less ideologically questionable, I guess, because there are insurgent groups in Russia who are sort of fighting or doing sabotage operations against the Russian military and state police and whatnot. But a lot of them have, they're like, yeah, we're fighting the Kremlin, we're also anti-Semites or whatever. So I didn't want to get into all the ins and outs of each one of those groups. So I fictionalized that and made that a little different. I made the Russian resistance outside of Russia more organized and robust. There's a character in there named Mikhail Sorkin, who is based on an oligarch named Mikhail Kordovsky, who isn't spending billions and billions of dollars to try and overthrow Vladimir Putin, but in the book, this guy is trying to, from outside Russia, affect change on the inside. So all that stuff was sort of made up, but I wanted to understand things geopolitically, where the world would be, but then I was like, all right, I'm going to change this and I'm going to change this. There's a character in there named Nathan Yarovoy, who is a takeoff on Alexei Navalny, who most people know was the sort of the main opponent to Vladimir Putin back when, they even had sham elections, and then they poisoned him. He survived. He went back to Russia for some terrible reason. They arrested him, threw him in prison, and then they killed him in prison. In my book, Nathan Yarovoy is in prison and he's dying, but he's still alive. So there's a lot of things I did that I'm like, okay, I'm going to really fictionalize the heck out of this to make a little bit more hopeful story than the way that I see it, because I think it's pretty bleak right now.
Well, it's fiction. It's your novel, so
yeah.
you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think the camera got jolted. So let me get Patrick to rearrange it.
Is it focused on me?
We don't want to lose Mark.
We can all just lean in.
Right.
Well,
Patrick, yeah, there you are.
While you're doing that, so this book to me, in terms of the resistance to the Russian, I don't know what you want to call it, the regime, it felt as close to Red Metal as I felt when I was reading it. So in Red Metal, you've got, the Russians that sweep through Europe and in other places, and you've got these people that are standing up in resistance to them. And this one felt like that to me. Were you, when you were writing this one, did you kind of, maybe think back to when you were writing Red Metal with Rip and kind of how that feeling, and how has the world changed between when you were writing Red Metal versus now? I mean, obviously, we know the world's changed a lot in terms of Ukraine, but there's the fact that you still have that resistance against the the Russian Empire, if you will.
Yeah. So Red Metal was a book I co-authored with a Marine lieutenant colonel, and it came out in 2019. Seems like a long time ago now. And it was about Russia invading the West and actually attacking into Africa as well. And so I did a lot of research for that, and the Polish resistance was a big part of that story. In this book, there is a resistance of Russian nationals inside Russia, but then this book also shows what the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence, is doing as far as assassinations and bombings and starting fires and all these things they're doing across Europe to sow discord and whatnot. And so I thought that was really, really interesting. The West or Europe has sent home 400 Russian spies since 2022, since the main invasion. So now a lot of the spies, or a lot of people that are doing these sabotage operations, are not Russians. They are people hired off of Telegram. They're calling it like gig economy sabotage. It's sort of like the Uber Eats of sabotage is going on over there now. But they're killing people, and they're paying people to do all these things on behalf of Russia. And of course, there are Russian spies still active over there. And so that whole thing that's going on below the surface, I mean, Russia's at war with the West. They see Ukraine as a battleground. They don't see Ukraine as a real nation or anything. That's just a battleground. Russia is at war with the West, but we can't say we're at war with them. We have to say this is like, whatever, just sort of harassing, menacing actions or whatever that they're doing. But, they've put bombs on DHL planes, and they're dragging, they're damaging telecommunications cables and fuel lines under the sea, and the Havana syndrome stuff, the microwave pulse energy weapons that are being used against our diplomats and spies. It's pretty robust what the Russians are doing. And so I wanted to write about that. And that wasn't in Red Metal at all. But yeah, definitely the main thing that's changed is Red Metal, we overestimated the Russian military capabilities. Not their sheer size or anything like that, but just, the newest Russian tank was the T-14. So we put the T-14 in the book. Of course you do. And this war's been going on for 3 years. If there was one T-14 that's made it into Ukraine, I haven't seen it. It's like they're mostly T-72s, which is 50, 60-year-old tanks, and they're getting eviscerated. Yeah. So the Russian military isn't nearly what it was hyped to be, and I guess I helped hype it with Red Metal, but I mean, you just go with the information that you have at the time. So yeah, the world is a very different place.
So speaking of being different, I mean, your bad guys throughout the Gray Man series have changed. I mean, you've got some in the Middle East, you've got some in South America. I mean, it's been all over. Lately, it's been a lot of Russia. Do you see that changing anytime soon? Do you see it going into something different?
Yeah, so I had this philosophy because Burner, which was 2 books ago, involved Russia, and then this book involved Russia. So as I was writing this book last year, I was like, okay, I won't be able to touch Russia for a few years because, I've done that. But then I started thinking, Le Carré wasn't thinking that in the 70s and the 80s, because the Soviet Union was the biggest thing going on. And Tom Clancy wasn't going like, oh, I guess I got to do a war with Venezuela. It's like he did do other things, but I don't think there was this thing in the back of his head that's like, oh, people don't want to hear about the Soviet Union again. So I'm telling myself, the book I'm writing this year, which is the 15th Gray Man, has nothing to do with Russia, but I will go back there as sort of the story dictates. And, Russia's going to be in the news. I mean, everybody thinks just massive peace is about to break out. I don't really get it, but that's what everybody's patting themselves on the back. Meanwhile, Russia's blowing up the outer protective layering over Chernobyl, which seems like a funny way to enter into the peace negotiations.
That's a book story. If anybody wants to write a book about that, that'd be a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned Northern Ireland. What can you tell us about that? Anything?
The next book? Not really, and it's not because I'm being all cagey. It's because I'm real early in writing it, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I haven't quite ironed out yet. So it's like when you pitch your book to my editor, he'll be like, "What's this book going to be about?" I'm like, I can sort of see pictures and images, and there's a bad guy. I'm not sure why he's doing what he's doing, but here's what he's doing, So it's always very, very vague. Some people plot their books out a lot better than I do, and I try every single year. I try to plot it out, and I think I need to just realize that plotting it out is just me being lazy and not working, because I'm really not getting much plotting done. I kind of have to get into the meat of the book before I can figure it out, and so it's a little tough for me to talk about next year's book, because I'll turn it in the summer, and then I'll know what it's about probably by the second draft. this book, Midnight Black, it took me longer to write this book than any book I've written before. And, I would reach out to my editor. I'm like, I swear I'm not being lazy. I swear I'm sitting here looking at the page. And even though I knew in general what I wanted to happen, there was a whole lot of chapters I would just throw out, not because I didn't like them. It was just sort of like, what if I told it a different way? Or maybe, I feel a little less certain. Back when I was writing Clancy books, I would just crank it out and crank it out. And now it's a lot of like thinking about the storytelling and go like, would the reader's experience be better if this was in a whole different point of view, and you just threw that out and added something else. And so it's a weird little dance with the writing, and this one took me a long time to come together. Hopefully this year's book will be smoother, but I think I've said that before.
So I think a lot of people might be interested in your writing process. Like, I know a lot of people have a set routine. They wake up at a certain time, they put so many words on a page a day, and they don't stop until they reach that goal. For those that are wondering, I don't do that. I will routinely not write because I'm not inspired. Do you have that? Do you have a routine, or do you write when you're inspired? Do you have certain locations that are more inspiring than others? What's your process look like?
Yeah, I write in the mornings, and right now I'm doing publicity for this book, so I really haven't gotten any writing done today or yesterday. I'm also working on a plot for a book I'm doing next year. So I'm doing some stuff on that, just research-wise. I've done some research reading this week, but usually what I do is I get up and start writing as soon as I can in the morning, and I write one block of writing as long as I can during the day. There's always things that get in the way of that. I like going to coffee shops. There's a coffee shop that I go to in Memphis that's near the university, where like the average age there is like 21 and nobody knows or cares who I am. So that's nice to go there and work for a few hours. When I go to other places, enough people know me that they'll sit down and do. A lot of them are friends of mine or people that I'm acquaintance with, but it's not really how you can do your job because when you're a coffee shop, you're kind of open game. But I like to, I like to just get as many words down on paper as I can. I've been a real word counter, and I'm trying to get away from that because, gosh, I would be obsessed. I would say I wrote 2,500 words today. Today is a good day. Well, are the words good? And if you're chasing a word count, you might not be chasing, what you need to be chasing in the story. So, I mean, really, if I quantify my work by hours a day that I work, they're just by the focus. And I really have started to learn that like writer's block and procrastination just mean that you're stuck. It's not. It's like you say you're not inspired. It's that you just don't have that idea right now, and you kind of have to go get the idea. Like, there's no writer's block if you know what you're going to write. Like, there's no, or there's no procrastination. Like, if you or I had a really, really good idea, we're not going to just go sit and stare at the ceiling, and we're going to write it down. So you kind of just have to get yourself back on track to where you're thinking about it. So I like to edit. I like to go back the pages I'd written before and reread those, and a lot of times that gets me sort of in the right frame of mind at the beginning of the day to write.
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing. When I sit down to write, I'll go back and read maybe the last two chapters, maybe make a couple changes here and there, and then I'm either inspired, like you're saying, or I'm not, in which case I find that whiskey helps. Do you have a lubricant that works for you?
I never drink and write just because I think I would stop writing. I mean, I would just go watch TV or just hang out. I mean, that just means, I feel like that means I'm off the clock. So that never happens. Drink a lot of coffee, and nothing else really works other than, I do a lot of like self-flagellation. I'm just going like, get up, get work. I'm laying in bed and I have a lot of trouble sleeping because I'm laying in bed at night going like, you can't go to sleep. You've got to figure out how they get, from that ship over to the other ship or something like that. And you just sit there and like ponder that stuff. You're not your most creative at that point.
What about those pills that Joe Rogan gave you? Were those helpful
yeah.
at all?
Yeah. Yeah. The nootropics, they're called. Yeah. It's, he handed me like 6 when I was on his show and said I could take them, and I took them. And then later I looked on the thing and it said you're supposed to take 2. So I took all 6 on camera. And
you wrote 10,000 words that night.
Yeah, I wish I could say that changed everything for me. I could be a spokesperson for it, but Yeah, I think it did make me a little jumpy, but yeah.
So during COVID, when you and I had to Zoom a couple of times, I was treated to your beautiful office. So why are you working in a coffee shop when you have this amazing office?
Well, most of the time I work in my office. I like to work in the coffee shop just because it just takes all the possible distractions out, you know. Even though the office is not attached to my house, I'm still 50 steps away from my dogs and, you know, or family or anything else that's going on. Or, you know, it's like the guy killing the moles can't get in, so you have to go let him in the gate. Or, you know, just that stuff happens all day long if you're home, you know. It's like and every little thing, it's like, oh, they put the wrong mulch in the backyard, the dogs are going to eat it. And so it's like, oh, I got to go out there and talk to the yard guy. You know, that happens all day long if you let it. So when I can go, if I can get to the coffee shop at 7 in the morning and stay there till like 11:30 in the morning, that doesn't seem like a really, really long time. But if if you get 3.5 focused hours of writing, that's you can get a lot done. And then I can do the other researchy stuff or businessy stuff. I can do that at night, and that works best for me, for sure.
Yeah, you're lucky that your office is detached. I have an office in my house, and the doors are glass. And so routinely I'll be on a podcast or something, and my 16-year-old son will walk up and be like, I love you, Dad. Which is cool for a 16-year-old to do that, but at the same time it's a little distracting. So if you ever watch me on a podcast, you see my eyes looking over that way going, go away. Yeah, you know why. So I can understand.
It's not the worst
that.
thing a 16-year-old could do.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not complaining. William, I love you. But the coffee shop advice, I know you gave me that early on. You said you go there, it kind of energizes you, and especially if you're somewhere and you're staying in a hotel, which as an airline pilot, I stay in hotels a lot, and unfortunately, we don't really have coffee shops in the hotels where I stay, so we have bars. And that's where I do find myself getting energized. So that's why I mentioned whiskey. Beer also works. You just go down there, set your laptop up, and write. So that I find that works for me. If you need some advice from me, I know you're just getting started. 14 gray man, I'll help you out.
So we've talked about your writing process, but there's a lot of very carefully orchestrated action scenes. In fact, the opening chapters of this book are just like one rolling action scene. I'm particularly impressed that at one point Kurt's in a Mercedes and he backs it out of a parking garage at 40 miles an hour. I can't even parallel park my Mercedes. So I was just dazzled with that. But anyway, you know, how do you orchestrate these scenes? Do you're obviously blocking them out like a stage director. How do you do that?
Yeah, the action scenes, the first draft of action scenes go really quickly for me. And then when I'm editing it later, I'm really, really focused on, does this make sense? Is this too complicated? Sometimes I'll be using like a real place as reference, but a lot of times I'm just making it up. And, I'm trying to get away from, I met one of the writers of The Gray Man, Steve McFeely. He was a really nice guy. I met him at the premiere for The Gray Man. And he's like, you know what your best books are? He's like, your best books are Sierra 6 and I think he said Backblast and one other, I can't remember. And and he was just talking, he really enjoyed the series and all this other stuff. He's like, can I give you one piece of advice? And I was like, which usually means somebody's about to poop on you, but and I said, sure. And he's like, I would lay off the abandoned buildings for a while. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, that's a note I totally get. I do that a lot because you have your action scene in your head that, you have things that need to happen in your action scene, but then you have to spend a lot of words describing a three-dimensional area. And so it's just easy to use like an abandoned building or something like that. That's they do it in the movies. In the movies, I think Roger Ebert used to call it a steam and fire factory. It's like everything happens in a steam and fire factory. It's like, think of the end of the Terminator. It's like they're chasing each other. They crash into a steam and fire factory and they're just like pulled along a conveyor belt with fire and steam just randomly going off. Well, as a writer, you kind of like are trying to do something shorthand because you're like, I don't want people in the weeds of me describing, what this mini mall looks like or, what Poison Pen looks like. Would you mention that shelf there that kind of breaks up your sight line, or does that confuse people and make them think it's two different rooms? So you have to think about the reader, because you want them to read those scenes really fast. You
I
want them
get
to be
it,
pulled
but
into
it
that.
has to be a visual process for you. I mean,
Yeah.
you're actually seeing it, or you wouldn't
Yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
do that. And I think that, there are writers who say they see the whole thing going on like a movie in their head. So to you, some degree, is that what happens with you?
Eventually, yes. So one thing I do is I always tell myself, make it worse, for the hero. You make it worse for Court. And so, like, he's in a situation where he gets knocked down some stairs or whatever. It's like, does he lose his gun? Does another guy show up? Is there a third person there? Is he out of ammunition? So you keep trying to ratchet up, and then when you feel like the scene's gone on kind of long enough, you go, all right, now let's figure out the way to resolve it. I've told myself early in the Gray Man series that, like, put this guy in a corner that you have no idea how you're going to get him out of, and don't worry about getting him out of it as you're putting him in the corner. Worry about that later, and then you can fix things. But, like, you don't want to sort of stage the scene with a lot of, like, foreshadowing ways for him to get out of it. It's like I want it to be hard for me to come up with a way for him to get out of it, because it's hard for him.
There's one of those scenes in this book. I know I was reading, and I won't give it away, no spoilers, but there was a scene where I was like, there is no way he is going to escape this book alive, but there's still 2/3 of the book, so I know he does. And I was just, anyway, it was...
Well, his nephew can always take over, I could write a nephew for him, and then he's just gonna pick it up.
Yeah, but you do have to leave. You know how it's really cheating if you're writing a regular detective novel and on page 229 or something, the actual guy who did it shows up for the very first time. I mean, that's so bad. So I thought when you were writing in the opening scenes and all there, you have to be careful. You have to leave something that will work, so the reader can't go, wait, it was never there, so it's not okay if this is what saves him.
Yeah.
But you also have to do it in such a way that we're distracted from it, so that we don't go, oh, okay, I see what's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a little bit of subterfuge there where there's just some foreshadowing where they talk about how they'd been following him, but they lost him for a little while. And there's some, like, just a quick mention of some vehicles that, like, come into play. And so it looks like the bad guys hold all the cards, but this isn't Court's first rodeo, so it's kind of that type of a situation.
It's almost like a Western. You see the gunfight coming. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So following up on something Jack asked you, when you are looking for your next book, some of it has to come out of the characters and the situation that you left, but you can sort of like pick anywhere. So how is it that you pick the new place?
Specifically for my next book, the villain is from Northern Ireland, and there's reasons for that, and I want to make him interesting and very not likable, but let's say someone that you really sort of understand his story and his plight. So that's why Northern Ireland. I mean, I've been, like, fascinated by things in the news, and I've written books because of that. Like, On Target, the second Gray Man book, I was really interested in what was going on in Sudan. Ballistic, the third one, I was super interested in what was going on in Mexico. Still am. And so I wanted to learn about it at the same time. This book, Midnight Black, I would be doing all this research about Russia and Ukraine and all that every day anyway, because I'm very interested in what's happening over there. And so makes it as a good use of my time, as opposed to me just going down rabbit holes and reading about this stuff all the time. The next book is less geopolitical. It's more about just about the characters, and it does take place in the U.S. and overseas. So the next one is less tied to the headlines and more like the original Gray Man, which has nothing to do with the headlines. It's about trying to rescue somebody and all that. So the next one involves like different generations of characters, families, and stuff like that. So I don't want to say too much, but it involves like Court's family and Hightower's family and the villain's family. So
Jack, let's ask you the same question. How's it work for you? Because your fourth book in your series will be coming out, whenever.
In August.
August,
Yes.
right? When I expect to see
Yeah.
you on another flight back to Phoenix, right?
I'm sure you'll see me before then, but yes.
Probably so, right? Which is always great. But anyway, how did you come to evolve your series?
Well, when I first started the series, I used China as the bad guy, mainly because of what in the Navy my experiences were in the Chinese Navy and what China was doing and expanding in the South China Sea and making these islands. And there was a lot of my missions that I flew in the F-18 were in the Pacific, and so I used China as a bad guy, but it started to feel a little tropey towards the end, and I wanted to shift, and especially with what Russia was doing in Ukraine. I thought it was a nice transition to hand off the baton, if you will, from China to Russia, and I sort of see them as a red-blooded American that I am. I sort of see all communists in the same light. So China and Russia, they seem like a pretty nice symbiotic relationship, and it was an easy handoff. And so the third book was really that transition, and so the fourth book sort of ties it all together, and it concludes with Russia as the ultimate bad guy. Which growing up as a fan of, like Mark, the 80s and 90s and the spy thrillers and the Cold War. I mean, that's what I grew up on.
Okay, but we tend to think of Russia as being Eurocentric, because that's the interface with Russia that we think about. But the truth is that Russia has a major Pacific presence.
Hugely,
and
yeah.
Now that the Arctic is melting, and Brad Thor writes about this a lot, that Russia keeps pushing Russian territory out so that they can expand the 200-mile deal into the Arctic Ocean and so forth. But with shipping lanes now could go across the world and coming. You know what it reminded me of, for if you know your history at all, for several centuries, Venice was the interface between Europe and Asia, because the Silk Road came, and Venice had a huge trade with Istanbul across the Adriatic. And then one day the Portuguese thought, well, we could just go around Africa and we could get there, and we could eliminate Venice as the middleman here. So everything shifted then to first going around Africa, and then Columbus went that way, and everything shifted west, leaving Venice basically as a tourist attraction and a backwater, and the Arsenale was their major shipyard, is no more. If you travel in that part of the Mediterranean, the Venetians, they were like Russia. I mean, they owned, all kinds of stuff there. So now I think what's happening, I just realized that the other day, that instead of the west ship lanes thing, what we're seeing now is we're going to start seeing the shipping lanes are going to go north across the Arctic. They're going to go over the top of Russia. They're going to shorten all kinds. The Panama Canal may be left kind of in the dust, as a consequence of all that. And so I think as thriller writers, you have to think about that. But Russia is a Pacific power. It isn't just a European power.
It's one of the nations closest to the U.S. You never think about
It's
that.
like 3 miles.
Yeah.
I've been through there, and there's those little islands in the Bering Strait.
Yeah.
If you're on a ship and you're doing that, they pause.
Yeah.
And so you can almost step off the ship into Russia briefly as you're transitioning up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I won't talk too much about it, but the book that I'm writing right now involves the basically naval powers in the Pacific, and Russia is surprisingly one of the large players there. I mean, China is trying to challenge them, but still Russia has a very large presence. They routinely have a naval exercise in the Pacific with their partners, and I mean, hundreds of ships and aircraft, and it's pretty impressive. Granted, what Mark said earlier about red metal and kind of highlighting what we thought the strengths of the Russian army were, I could be doing the same thing with the Russian Navy. They may be not as challenging as we think, but still it's something that we have to consider. So as thriller writers in particular, we're looking at that kind of stuff and including it.
Vladivostok is a big port. I mean, we're always listening about Russia wanted a warm water port, and so they built St. Petersburg. They're trying to get out of the Black Sea, but the truth is they have a warm water port. It's just in the other ocean.
Yeah.
And so, it's all going to change. Right. So, anything else you want to ask Mark, or should we get audience questions?
No, I think we can ask the audience.
All right, Mark, you're in charge.
All right. Anybody have
All
any
right. Would you
Yes.
repeat the question for the camera, too?
Sure.
So you talked earlier about how you would write pages and then you go through some introspection on maybe a different perspective. But you said you get rid of those pages. Do you you've written, write it the new way, and then maybe go back and compare, or do you just cut and get rid of it to start anew?
Yeah, so he's asking, when I edit something out of the story, do I hold on to it, or do I just totally get rid of it? I hold on. I have kind of dump files for all my books, and I don't think I've ever pulled anything out and used it somewhere else or anything like that. It's usually a different version of what I was thinking of that first time ends up in there, so it doesn't really leave it where you can take it. There's a few scenes that I've written that just didn't really fit the book at the end, and so I'm holding on to those that I'll put into another book. It's like, hey, I got 2,000 words today, and I didn't do anything. But they're few and far in between, unfortunately. Usually, I just chunk it. But I mean, the file still exists, but I save a different file for every day that I'm writing, so I can go back to like June 22nd's version of this and see what it looks like of last year. So I keep it. I'm so paranoid about losing pages or losing data. What else? Yes, sir.
Today, your book has come out. How long ago did you finish your first draft? What's the time gap
So-
between finishing your first draft and today?
Yeah, so he's asking how long from when I finished the first draft till today. I can tell you specifically because I remember all the heat I was getting from my publisher because I was so late. Usually I try and have it done in July. This one was very early October was the first draft. And then I did a second draft in 10 days or so. And then I did the third draft. So it was November when the final draft. So it's like I'll do a draft, it goes to my editor, he reads it, but I'm immediately like I'll give it to him to read and then I'll get his thoughts on it, but I immediately the next day go back to page 1 and start working on it because he'll give me his thoughts, but I know there's 1,000, little things that need to be cleaned up. And so then I'll do a second draft and then it goes to the copy editor and they'll point out everything and it comes back to me and I'll do a third draft and then it goes to a proofreader and it comes back to me and I'll do a fourth draft and that's it. And still there'll be something, there'll be things in the book that are wrong. It's like you can't catch everything, but the readers will catch it and they'll, yeah.
And write to you.
And write
even more.
to me.
Can I ask Jack a quick question?
Yeah.
What kind of whiskey stimulates the greatest creativity?
Okay, so the question is, this is listen up. What kind of whiskey stimulates the greatest creativity? Any. If it's wet, honestly. No, I like a rye whiskey. I think a rye is very good for the brain.
Yeah.
Follow up with Jack. I think you're onto something because whiskey worked for Hemingway.
Yes. Yes.
Until it didn't.
Debatable.
I wouldn't say long term it worked for me. Yeah.
I think there's a quote that was attributed to him that may not be accurate. It was write drunk, edit sober. I don't think he actually said it, but I live by that. I'm just kidding. No.
Yes, sir. Agree.
Plans for a follow-up to Red Metal?
Oh yeah, so this is a good question. A follow-up to Red Metal, it is in the works. I've been saying that for a long time. It's been in the works for a long time. Rip, my co-author, has been very involved in what's going on in Ukraine, supporting the Ukrainian effort from the U.S. mostly, but he's been over there several times and has been other places over there. But he's working on the book. I've got something else to write, and I'll start reading his pages, and I'll start working on it. So I still don't know when it's going to come out. I don't want to say. I know when my next couple of books are coming out, so it'll probably be spaced after that. But it is definitely coming. It should have come out already, but there were good reasons why it didn't. So I'm excited that it will be. Yes.
Midnight Black. Is there a theme you could summarize in a few words?
Is there a theme in Midnight Black? I'm really bad. The guy that writes takes 161,000 words to write the story is the worst person. I will read people go like, his book's about blah blah, and I go like, oh my god, that's so good. I wish I could have thought of that.
How about rescue?
Yeah, I mean it's a rescue story, but
Sacrificial love.
yeah, I mean it's a love story. I mean it's so important to me that their story doesn't get lost in the big geopolitical stuff that goes on. But it's a love story, but I wanted to throw in a lot of curveballs. The enemy gets a vote, and I didn't want this about court climbing over a fence, goes into Russia, finds a prison, puts on a mustache, sneaks in, and grab. It's like I could do that in 3 pages, and and that book will come out someday, probably when I've run out of ideas. But you know, so this book, the FSB and the GRU are having a conflict with one another, and Zoya is sort of pitted in the middle of that. And also, it's real important, Zoya isn't just this damsel in distress. She has a lot of agency in this story, and she's a huge part of the plot, not just the fact that she's in prison and she's in trouble. She's very much affecting outcomes. I think that's like an important part in these stories, that it's just not, you know, being used as like a pawn.
There's a certain amount of machinations back home too, you know. With the
There's a lot of inside stuff going on.
Institutional stuff
Yeah,
happening.
yeah.
It's a very complicated book, which is why it takes almost 500 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, Bridget.
2 questions.
Mhm.
Do you have another Josh Duffy coming out?
Okay, do I have another Josh Duffy book come out? I had a book called Armored, and then one last year called Sentinel that's part of a different series. As of right now, I don't. I hope to write another one. It's not going to be one of the next 2 books that I write, so it may be down the road. I'm writing a standalone novel next year that's not a Gray Man, not a Josh Duffy, not a Red Metal, not a Clancy. I don't know what it is, but I know what it's not. No, I have some ideas. It's a little bit wide for me. It's not an espionage story. It's a thriller, a little bit more of a domestic crime type of a story that I'll be working on next year. So I would like to do another Josh Duffy. I really like the character, and hopefully it's being developed for TV. So hopefully something will happen from that. So yeah. Next Gray Man movie, I don't know anything. I haven't heard anything in a while. I know that they were working on a script. They had a script that I think that they sent to somebody else, but I really haven't gotten any updates in a while, which is kind of how it was with the first movie. So I could hear something in the news tomorrow, and I hope I do, but I haven't heard anything recently. No. Oh, let's do way back there, and then we'll get you.
Talk about making every book work as a standalone book, but how do you also, now that you have like 13 other Gray Man books, also keep it consistent in the universe to make sure it's, consistent?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you write a series, how do you make it standalone and then also consistent in the series? So I always think about the story arc in that particular book, and then I think about the longer story arc for people who do read them all together. And so it's not integral that you know the story. Like I'm very good at setting up, all right, here's who the Gray Man is, here's what his problem is, here's just a hint of his backstory, and that's what gets you into each book. But if you read each book, you'll see Matt Hanley, and you'll know that he used to be Court's boss at Special Activities Division, and then he became the DDO of the CIA, and then he got demoted, and then he got moved. And so like you see his journey, and you see Zoya, who was an adversary of Court, and then became, the woman that he loves, and that was played around with a little bit in a couple of books, and then it became very, very close relationship, in the latter book. So, these relationships change over time. Zach Hightower tried to kill Court in the first book. People forget that. I forget that. That's the problem when I forget it. But it's sort of been kind of an anti-hero, sort of an adversary at different times. Now I can't imagine a scenario where he would turn on Court, but I can't say it won't happen. But as far as me keeping things straight, other authors do a better job of that. I'm very I'll have to go back and read a book. I'll remember in 1 Minute Out, Zach said he had a daughter who was in witness protection. How old was she? I have to go back and look at it. I'm like, did she have a name? Did he say that? Because I don't remember. And so I don't have total recall on this stuff at all. I mean, it would blow people away, and I wouldn't have believed this, but there are books that I've written that I don't remember what they're about, and I'm not kidding. And not that long ago, Relentless. I know it takes place in Germany, and I know it involves the United Arab Emirates and some kind of shenanigans. But I wrote that 4 or 5 years ago, but I've written 9 books since then, so I don't really.
You might want to start writing a Bible for your future estate authors to make life easier for them.
That's their problem. That's your problem, Jack. I wish I had something like that, but that means stopping to work on the book that I'm thousands of words behind in. So I'm always thinking you should do this. Every time I go to a book signing, there's people that are like, you need to start a group of writers that do this, and you could go out to schools and blah blah blah. And I'm like, everybody's got all these great ideas of how I should spend my time, but I'm so far behind. You know, it's like they want me to write books too. But all right, another
You know, you
question.
could actually hire somebody to create a Bible.
Yeah, I could. I should do that.
You should do that
I
because
should do that.
that's not,
I should.
you
do
know, that's not
I think
creative
Don
work,
Bentley's a
right?
good person.
So how about
Don.
one more question, and then we're going to have to.
that. Right here.
So with Zoya, did you always have an idea that Court would have a love interest, or was that something that happened organically over time?
Someone asked me that. I hadn't thought about that a lot. Someone asked me that last night. I was at, doing a signing, and I started out all high and mighty, going like, you know, it's true. I created her, and I didn't want her to be. I wanted people to think that was what was going to happen, and then they have an adversarial relationship, and then it turns out that she's as tough as he is, and she's got a similar vulnerability, or you know, different vulnerabilities, but she's like a real important character. And then I'm like, but then they hooked up. So I got but like when I initially got the idea of her, I was like, what about this female foil who's Russian and an adversary? And then they end up working together. It was a book called Gunmetal Gray. And so I kind of like came up with all that. And then I thought, you know, how much of a, how close are they going to get together? And by the end of that book, they had some sort of a relationship, although it went away and came back and all that. So I created her for her own reasons, but I didn't really think as I created her about making her a love interest. But I mean, it happened in the same book, so it didn't take me too long to put that together.
Before I was cutting off, there was one hand that went up. It was you, ma'am. Right. So I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Do you anticipate having time to write any more Clancy books?
Will I write more Clancy books? I don't think I will. There's other people that have taken on that. I did 7 in 6 years, and I always say this, but like I knew that when I got off that train, the train was going to keep going, and even if I wanted to, you know, so if I had an idea that seemed very specifically Clancy, I might do that. But I mean, if a writer has his own intellectual property, that's like really important, and not just for money reasons, also just like, you know, control of where it goes from there. So I don't think I would. I'm the luckiest person in the world that I got to do it, and I love doing it. And you know, I guess if I thought of an idea that was like so perfect for Clancy, I'd probably tell Jack about it and go like, get on the Clancy train. Yeah.
Well, actually, on the Clancy train, Mike Woodward is doing a really nice job with
Yeah, he's great.
Tom Clancy Jr., and we'll have copies of his book in May. And
Jack
then
Ryan Jr. Yeah.
That's what did I say?
Tom Clancy Jr.
Oh, sorry.
But that's
Jack Ryan Jr.
Tom
Too
Clancy
much
would
champagne.
appreciate that, actually.
Yep.
He
And
used to
then-
say he was Jack Ryan.
And then there are two guys. These are all Navy guys because Mike was in the Navy, and now Andrews and Wilson, Brian, and they are Navy guys. Really interesting, and they're writing Tom Senior. So I think it's kind of fun that you're getting a slightly different tilt to the to the Clancy's.
Yeah, I
as they-
think something's got to keep it fresh, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's
and also, it needs to move forward. So
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see what Jack does with the is it the Men of War in the Griffin, or which one are you doing?
It's the presidential agent series.
The presidential agent series, right? So I think it's interesting when you see, I've watched all the Parker people. I mean, it's like a merry-go-round to see how it works.
Hustler,
And we are fortunate that most of the legacy authors come here. So, we have a chance to do things with them. So we'll see. Anyway, thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you
I'm
so
going to
much,
raise
guys.
the glass again to Mark and Publication Day for Midnight Black. And I want to thank Jack for joining in.
Thanks,
And
Jack.
we'll see
Appreciate it.
Jack in August with a book of his own, or possibly earlier,
Two
right?
books. Oh, no.
I have one in May too.
Oh, okay.
Silent
Well, I
Horizons.
can say right now that Brad Taylor will be here with Don Bentley on April 27th. And Brad Thor will be early in July, and Jack Carr is out there. So, but just stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter, and then I will be able to tell you what all these guys are doing. So it's great fun. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. Your books are all signed. Mark came in early. Yours is not? I thought that we had caught all the books up in front. Well, in that case, you might want to stand in line and get your book signed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
And
Appreciate it.
Jack's are signed. So if you have a signed book, you can stay or go, as the case may be. If you would fold up your chairs and lean them against that wall and line up by number, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.